Now, before I go into the subject matter of today's video, I want to make a couple of things very, very clear. This is neither a pro David Moyes video nor an anti David Moyes video. Many of you have already made your minds up on that particular subject matter. And this video isn't designed to make you change your minds one way or another, and I'm sure it won't. But it's a video that I've been putting together for some time. I actually was planning to do it during the summer transfer window, but I'm quite glad I didn't because so many things have developed since then that it's kind of lended itself to me creating this video now. So just to be abundantly clear, it's neither a pro Moyes video nor an anti Moyes video. There are certain things in there that look like they are pretty much on Moyes' side, but there are certain things I'm going to talk about that pretty much are quite anti Moyes in the way he manages the team. And I guess over time, over the remaining part of this season, is going to help to determine what sort of stance he takes, especially with youth development at West Ham United. Another thing that this video is not is to advocate the buying out of West Ham by Red Bull. Absolutely not. It's more about the Red Bull vision, the Red Bull ideology that is used by a certain number of clubs around Europe. So it's more about that than it is about West Ham should be bought out by Red Bull. So please don't think it's that either. Now, about a week or so ago, I did a show about the academy and development squad at West Ham United, and I asked the question: why do academy players seem to want to leave West Ham? Is it because they really don't get enough game time in the senior squad and enough game time opportunity, or is it because agents acting on behalf of these players are simply demanding contracts for their clients when the young players themselves are nowhere really near the level of that the Premier League demands, hence not paying them Premier League wages? Or is it a combination of the two? So I wanted to follow on from that with an ideology that David Moyes admires, and that is the Red Bull ideology. Now, back in 2020, David Moyes revealed that in an ideal world, he would love to follow the Red Bull model for player recruitment and player development. Moyes talked about his spell when he was out of management, where he took time to study how the Red Bull model worked across a number of leagues and continents. He mentioned the rapid rise of Red Bull Leipzig. Red Bull Leipzig, a team in the German Bundesliga, who have competed in the Champions League and the Europa League on regular occurrences over a number of seasons. Now, Red Bull, as I'm sure you all know, is a group of, they get involved in quite a lot of sports, but they have 4 football teams under their umbrella: Red Bull Leipzig, New York Red Bulls, Red Bull Bragantino in Brazil, and Red Bull Salzburg. Moyes was impressed with the Red Bull model in how they produce and develop so many young, talented players, as well as buying young up-and-coming players from around the globe, rather than going out to buy big-name players at top prices. He also noted how other clubs were beginning to take note of that kind of player recruitment system and slowly trying to incorporate it into their own clubs' structures. Back then, David Moyes admitted that the model was probably not one West Ham United could follow in 2020 because there was continuous demand in the Premier League to bring in footballers who can produce instantly rather than having time to developing them. However, Moyes did give us a glimpse of how this player recruitment model could possibly work when he brought in one particular player who changed our fortunes and was instrumental in saving us from relegation. And that, of course, was Jarrod Bowen, who came in from Hull at the age of 23, a raw, young championship talent that Moyes used carefully and sparingly in the first 6 months at the club, but a talent that since proved to be one of our best and most sought-after players. Now, on top of that, Moyes did then go on to do the reverse when he brought in the likes of Craig Dawson to the club, a player with a wealth of experience, seasoned pro, who provided us with some steel and professionalism that many people assume can only come from an older player like Dawson. But what Moyes demonstrated was that you could have a mix of youth and experience in order to improve the club. And they both have in their own ways. Back then, David Moyes said, I would like to be at a club long enough where you can look at it and say, it doesn't matter really what the first team do at the moment, but right now it really does. And of course, he was talking at the time about West Ham's relegation plight after Pellegrini left the club. He went on to say, "You're always trying to bring in players for the future, but if you're trying to keep building and moving on, then you need to bring in players for the here and now. And that is our model of what we're trying to do at West Ham United." So that was in 2020, but it provided us with a bit of an insight into his player recruitment approach and probably what he had agreed with the board as part of West Ham's future recruitment strategy. Up until this season, we haven't had that kind of infrastructure at West Ham because of the continuous topsy-turvy turmoil that we have endured in the league over the years. We also haven't necessarily had managers who are ready to spend time focusing on younger players to be brought into the club and given time to mark their usefulness in first team because the risks were too high. Since Moyes' return, he's had to steer us clear of relegation before delivering 2 seasons of unprecedented improvement that I don't think either he, us, or the club were really expecting. So after those 2 successful seasons, did he now feel the time is right to introduce some kind of Redbull model, some kind of Redbull ideology to player recruitment in the summer? When we look at the 8 players that we signed in the summer, one can hardly call it a complete Redbull ideology. Of the 8 players we signed in the summer, well, 9 actually, if we include Nathan Trott, who was given a new extended contract till 2024 with a further option of extending another 2 years. Of the 9 players, 6 of those players were 25 and over, and only 3 would be considered anywhere near a kind of Red Bull approach. And those 3 players is Trott, as I've just mentioned, Gianluca Scamacca, and Flynn Downs, who are all 23 years of age. So what David Moyes has tried to do is, during the summer transfer window, he has tried to bring in some fresh young players. In those 3 players, he signed Trott on an extended contract, as well as bringing Downs and Scamacca in. But he's also brought in a wealth of experience as well from other clubs. Look, we now have on paper one of the strongest squads that we've had for as long as I can remember at West Ham United. And Moyes is also said to be keeping in touch, a closer eye on youth development, not only at the club itself, but around the globe as well. And this might explain why Rob Newman was recently out in Brazil, where we're developing closer connections with 4 clubs in Brazil, looking at young talent of the future. Clubs like Botafogo, Flamengo, Fluminense, and Vasco da Gama. And the result of the outcome of that scouting venture is the recent signing or the recent announcement by the club that we've just signed Luizão, a 20-year-old centre-back from Sao Paulo. So why does the board still... so now with those players at the club, the season isn't going as well as we know. So why does the board still have faith in Moyes? Is it because they bought into his vision of the Red Bull style player recruitment policy, where the manager not only tries to manage what's needed for the here and now, but also looking at the long-term development of players? When Moyes was offered the job as manager at West Ham United on a permanent basis, it's understood that there were discussions as to what it was he wanted in order to secure a permanent contract for him. One was to have autonomy on player recruitment. For example, he wanted no board interference on transfers. Moyes now seems to have that final say on all player recruitment at the club. He wanted a scouting network, and he's got that too, with Rob Newman at the helm. And then, of course, there is the imminent arrival of Mark Noble in his new role as sporting director, which Moyes seems to be fully backing. In his interview with The Guardian newspaper this week, Noble suggested that one of the reasons why the club have offered him the role of sporting director was because of his relationship with David Moyes. Noble said, "My relationship with Moyes over the past 2.5 years is probably one of the reasons why West Ham have asked me to do this job." Noble is going to be heavily involved in the recruitment of players, as well as the development and well-being of academy players, and trying to work their way through the ranks into the senior team. Is this another step towards the aim to try to create a Red Bull vision at the club? The process of nurturing young talent at the club, as well as signing quality young talent from around the globe, would not only be good for the footballing side of things, but will also be good on the business side of things as well. Developing them, selling them at a profit whilst reinvesting money in the next batch of future talent is surely something that the board will appreciate. Something that's self-financing rather than the board having to constantly hand out quite a lot of money in today's transfer market. In today's footballing world, whether we like it or not, football clubs are a business and must operate like one. And a Red Bull approach does seem to make an awful lot of business sense, so long as the right young players are brought into the club and sold when they're at their peak. Noble went on to say that in his interview with Guardian, that West Ham cannot compete with clubs who are owned by nations. And he sees that in the next 10 to 15 years, probably half the Premier League teams will also be owned by countries. Could West Ham be one of them? Who knows? But right now, we're not. West Ham are not in the category of competing with top clubs for the top players around the world. So the next best thing is to try and develop the academy players in the hope that they can become the future stars of tomorrow. Noble said we need to be in the market of probably 25 teams across Europe, maybe something like 8 teams in the Spanish league, the same number in the German league. Those are the rivals that Noble sees when it comes to recruiting players. And he said we've got to be clever and find ways of recruiting young talent and developing them, bringing them in through the academy to the first team, because that's a massive plus. We've seen that in Declan Rice, Ben Johnson, Mark Noble himself, and others. And Noble said a good young English player is worth about £40 million in the transfer market. So he said if we can produce 3 or 4 of them, we're doing something right. So is this what is happening at West Ham? Is this the ideal for West Ham? We've never really had a proper structured transfer policy at West Ham United. It's always been a bit hit and miss, and we've always had the odd gift that David Sullivan has given to past managers as well. So this sounds all wonderful. You know, we're looking at developing young talent, bringing in a Red Bull ideology, nurturing young talent, getting them through the development system, buying young players from abroad, etc. But there is the flip side of the coin to this, and that is the obvious and leaves a lot of West Ham fans a little bit bemused. If Moyes really is invested in developing young talent, why does he use them so sparingly? There were occasions last season when we were desperately short of players in some areas because of injuries. And Moyes yet was really reluctant to use some of the young talent available to him. One player in my mind that springs to mind is Ajibola Olise. The young centre-back, who could also play at left-back, was considered a big talent at West Ham United. And we suffered. We had Creswell out injured for a period of time, and we had our central defenders out injured for a period of time, and we were pretty desperate last season. And yet Moyes didn't seem it fit to bring Ajibola Olise through and give him an opportunity to play. Yes, he played in one of the Europa League games, a dead rubber, but not in a game that kind of really mattered. Ajibola Olise only made 2 senior appearances for West Ham before being sold to Sunderland in the summer for a nominal fee. And now, since he's gone, he's a regular starter for Sunderland in a team who are only 3 points off the playoff place with only half the season gone. So we have seen glimpses of young players at West Ham. David Moyes has used them sparingly, but no sooner do they get put in the first team itself than they disappear altogether again. Last season, we were raving about players like Sonny Perkins and Emmanuel Angelo. And this season, we've been raving about Ollie Scarles, Pierre Ekwa, and Divine Mbama. So I guess it takes a lot for a young player to sort of please David Moyes and in order to be given more game time. And I guess he would want to see more consistent performances beyond just the one game. But the counter argument to that is, of course, if you're not given the opportunity to play, then how can you demonstrate your consistency and what you're worth to the senior team? So what about the future? Well, just like last summer, we're likely to need a fair number of players coming into the senior team, as we could lose anything up to 7 or 8 players again because of contracts expiring or players being sold in the summer to come. We already have one of the oldest squads in the Premier League. And ironically, despite bringing in 8 players in the summertime 2 of which were 23 years of age, 4 at 25 and 26 years of age, and 2 at 28 and 29 years of age, Moyes only managed to bring the average age of the squad down by 1 year. So we're still one of the oldest squads in the Premier League. And this is because we've got several players that I call are in the over 30s club. Fabianski, Creswell, Soufal, Antonio, Dawson, Akbono and Randolph. And added to that next season, Areola and Lanzini will also turn 30 as well. Now, of those players, we're quite likely to see at least maybe 4 of those players leaving the club, maybe some in the January transfer window, and quite likely most of them in the summer transfer window in 2023. So if David Moyes really wants to adopt a Red Bull model, he would at least need to bring in much younger players to replace these players, either in the transfer market or through the development squads. But he also needs to really start trusting the players he has available to him in the academy and development squad. Granted, results in the league are important. Staying in the Premier League is absolutely vital. But either Moyes simply doesn't trust the youth that he's got available to him, or they're simply just not good enough. Now, as I mentioned, there are a number of academy players who could follow in the footsteps of former development players, such as who are in the current squad, like Declan Rice, Connor Coventry, and Ben Johnson. I've already mentioned some of them. Ben Johnson, Nathan Trott could look at replacing Darren Randolph as potentially the third choice keeper in the squad. Trott is out on loan again this season with a Danish club, Vejle, and he's doing exceptionally well. He's the first choice keeper there. So he's getting a lot of game time and a lot of game experience. And then, of course, on the left side, there's Emmanuel Longello, who is out on loan at Birmingham City, and they're doing exceptionally well. And Longello is a regular team starter in that team as well. They're 8th in the championship and looking at promotion as well. And then, of course, there's Pierre Ekwa. Pierre Ekwa, from what I understand, West Ham United are looking at a club to loan him out to for the remainder of this season, but they want a club that's going to play him so he gets some game time experience. So it could be that these players are the next in line to come through the development squad, and that'll be absolutely fantastic. And then there are younger players, future stars. There's Ollie Skiles, there's Divine Mbama, and there's Callum Marshall. Ollie Skiles and Callum Marshall recently signed their professional contracts at the club. Divine Mbama has been fantastic for us, looking really lively in the friendly game he played against Fulham the other day, as well as in the Europa Conference League as well. So the Red Bull ideology is clearly the way forward. But there's another question I guess that fans are going to be asking. And is it that David Moyes, is he the right manager to nurture the Red Bull ideology at West Ham United? Look, I think what's being set up, I think is good regardless of what manager is going to be in place. So if David Moyes ever leaves, having the scouting network, looking at young talent around the globe is absolutely right. Having Mark Noble come in to work alongside either David Moyes or any future manager to develop youngsters, make recommendations to the manager of what youngsters could be ready for the senior team, etc., I think is also the right approach. So I do see a kind of Red Bull ideology, beginning to be nurtured at the club. Now, it's interesting, whether it's Moyes or not, it doesn't really matter. It's good that we've got that. But it's interesting that a lot of fans are calling for the likes of Pochettino and Tuchel to come and manage West Ham United. Both managers who've recently haven't really kind of cared much for youth development systems, but more about spending a vast amount of money in the transfer window in order to bring success to the clubs that they've managed. So maybe if the board really do decide to move David Moyes on at any stage, and that if they do believe in the Red Bull ideology, maybe they ought to be looking at some other managers who have already experienced this elsewhere. Domenico Tedesco, Marco Rose, Matthias Jesel, and Julian Nagelsmann are all managers who have had first-hand experience at working in Red Bull teams in Europe. That's it for now. Thank you all for watching. If you're new to the channel, do hit the subscribe, like, and bell notification. Leave your messages after this show and tell me what you think about Red Bull. Is that the right ideology for West Ham? Is it the way forward? Is David Moyes the right person to take that forward? He seems to be the first manager to have looking at bringing that into the club, but is he the right manager to take it forward? Really appreciated. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all soon.